Councilmember. Okay.
All righty, it's 6 o'clock on Monday, June 21st, 2021. I'd like to call the meeting to order if we could. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Dave,
Here.
Mark,
Excused.
Bob,
Here.
Jeff,
Here.
Jay,
Excused.
Taylor,
Excused.
Chelsea. Here.
Okay, with that, we have 4 people here present in the room, in the chamber, and 3 people who are absent. And with that, next is the voluntary pledge of allegiance. Thank you. We have on the agenda now approval of minutes. We have minutes from 3 separate meetings from July 20th, 2020, the regular assembly meeting notes, July 24th, 2020, special assembly meeting minutes, July 7th, 2021, regular assembly meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been and seconded to approve those minutes. All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and those opposed? Hearing none, all those minutes are approved. Are there any amendments to tonight's agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed with the amend as presented to us. The item 5 is public hearings. Tonight we have one public hearing. It's public hearing for ordinance 2021-11. An ordinance amending chapter 4.30 Alaska Remote Sellers Sales Tax Code of the Borough Code. And this is an update of an ordinance we passed about a year ago that amends some of the provisions in it that were found to be deficient or needed to be addressed at any rate. And do we have anybody present that would like to talk to this ordinance? Okay, hearing none, I'll move on here then. We have no bid awards tonight. The next item is persons to be heard related to the agenda. Are there anybody that wants to be heard related to the agenda tonight? I understand we have one person.
We have one on Zoom. I don't know how many we have inside the room.
Okay, anybody in the room? And I would take those first if anybody wants to talk to it. Okay, hearing none. Debbie, would you?
Hello, Mayor. Can you hear me?
We can. You're coming through loud and clear.
Thank you, Mayor and Assembly members. My name is Jason Custer, and I reside at 1260 Millar Street in Ketchikan, Alaska. I work as Vice President of Business Development for Alaska Power and Telephone and its subsidiaries, which includes AT&T Wireless. With me tonight on Zoom are our Telecommunications General Manager, Brent Akers, and Ryan Wapshall, the Project Manager for the Sea-Link Submarine Fiber Optic Cable Project. AT&T Wireless is using USDA grant funds to develop a submarine and terrestrial fiber optic cable that will interconnect Prince of Wales Island to Juneau via Petersburg. The project, called Sea-Link, will also create new terrestrial networks bringing very high-speed broadband to the communities of Kaufman Cove and Kasan. This infrastructure will also be very beneficial to other families, businesses, and stakeholders in the region, including in Petersburg, helping to improve reliability, community sustainability, and to create new economic opportunity through broadband. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated how critical broadband access is to the sustainability of communities in islanded rural locations. We are thankful to have this opportunity to help improve service throughout the region and enhance the quality of life in rural Alaska through e-learning, telemedicine, e-commerce, improved public safety, enhanced civic participation, and all of the other benefits which broadband makes possible. The Central Council of the Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska and the organized village of Kasan were key supporters during the application phase and provided renewed letters of support last week. AT&T is requesting that the Petersburg Borough please grant a utility easement for a submarine cable landing at the location of a pre-existing, previously developed submarine cable landing site on Sandy Beach Road, which has been abandoned by AT&T. AT&T's submarine fiber optic cable will travel over the seafloor through the tidelands in a buried conduit, arriving at a precast beach manhole located on the easement. From there, the cable will travel through buried conduit to an existing utility pole on the Sandy Beach right-of-way. AT&T will use a mini excavator to trench and backfill conduit sections and restore the disturbed area to its original contour. We will reseed disturbed vegetative areas with an approved seed mix. Construction would likely take around 1 week. The total improvements on the easement would be an estimated $300,000 investment. With this project, we anticipate a total of $7 million in new investment on Mitkoff Island overall. We do not anticipate significant operations and maintenance activities on the easement unless there is unusual damage or an emergency. We developed this concept and the location of the easement in close communication with Borough staff beginning in March to make sure that our application would be a good fit with community expectations and priorities and to avoid conflicts. We very much appreciate all the help and guidance Liz Cabrera and the other staff have provided to us in this effort. Staff helped us to confirm the AT&T easement is abandoned and available. They assisted us with the application, and they were very helpful in connecting us with information about the area. Thanks again, Liz and Petersburg staff. In closing, thank you for considering our request, and our team, Brent and Ryan and myself, would be glad to answer any questions that may come up when the agenda item comes up later this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hold the questions for the members here till we get to that item. Is there anybody else to be heard on items related to the agenda tonight? Okay, if not, I'll move on to the persons to be heard on related items in the agenda. And Mr. Lee, if you want to take the podium and state your name and who you represent, please.
My name is Eric Lee. I represent myself. I have a few comments and suggestions for questions to Senator Murkowski regarding the Natives Without Land bill. My first comment regards, question number 2, sent in by the Assembly, which reads, if this legislation is enacted, will the newly formed corporations refund the in lieu benefits they have received since 1971? The question and the response are a little difficult for the layperson to understand. So in an effort to provide clarity, I will share the way the issue was explained to me by someone who was directly involved in the drafting of the original language in ANCSA that covers revenue sharing. The person I corresponded with stated that it was recognized at the time that the Native peoples that were not eligible to be enrolled in any Native corporation needed compensation as well as those who did qualify. So in lieu of receiving land of their own with which they could generate revenues through resource extraction, they would receive compensation from monies generated by the resource extraction on lands owned by the corporations that qualified. So that's really it in a nutshell. This revenue sharing arrangement was considered fair and equitable at the time, as it was recognized that under this agreement, the without land shareholders would generally receive dividend checks that would be larger than their corporation shareholder counterparts. The person I corresponded with also said that language in ANCSA regarding revenue sharing of resource extraction monies was drafted before the timber and oil booms that started in the 1970s. The timber and oil booms that began shortly after ANCSA was passed resulted in generating much greater compensation to without land shareholders that had been anticipated at the time the revenue sharing language was written. So the answer to the question of whether the new corporations would have to pay back the money they received since 1971 was no. An informative follow-up question would be, does this bill provide for the 5 new village corporations to pay into the revenue sharing agreement of ANCSA? To be equitable to the native corporations that contributed revenues into the ANCSA revenue sharing agreement by the depletion of their timber and oil, the 5 new village corporations should contribute under the same agreement. So this is an important question regarding equity, which is hopefully the goal of all this. Another aspect of the bill to be considered is the precedent-setting nature of the bill. It seems that a bill such as this, which does not abide by the original ANCSA criteria for village corporation status, could have the potential for setting a new precedent that could have far-reaching implications for all Alaska. So it's a very important subject to discuss, and hopefully before the bill is introduced and the dialogue moves to DC, where it's harder for Alaskans to participate and be heard. The dialogue gets taken over by people with their own interests, and it's just hard for us to communicate in an effective way once that bill is introduced, or any bill. Question 29 seems to be related to the question of precedent setting. It reads, will ANCSA have to be modified to make their lands and infrastructure transfer possible? To make this lands and infrastructure transfer possible, excuse me. The first sentence of the response is, ANCSA will be amended to establish the new urban corporations for Southeast Alaska. So an important question is, what part of ANCSA would be amended? What would that consist of? Would this amendment have the potential for setting any new precedent regarding the eligibility criteria of ANCSA? I think it would be good to have a draft of any amendment that has been, any language that's been worked out regarding that amendment to ANCSA. If the Assembly could hear that, I think it would be very informative and perhaps helpful in the process. So these are important questions, and I urge the Assembly to frame them in an appropriate manner and submit them to Murskowski's office with a request for a prompt reply. I think there's no reason why that, they can't change their way of answering and be prompt. We deserve it. They haven't done their research that would have answered a lot of these questions. So we certainly deserve to have these questions answered and not be rushed into any decision regarding what they come back with. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Lee. Is there anybody else in the queue, Debbie?
There is not.
There is not. Hearing then, there on boards, commission, committee reports, there are none. Consent agenda tonight, there's one item, and that's Inga's Gallery liquor license transfer. Do I have a motion on the transfer of that license?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion on it? Okay, hearing none. Debbie, would you call roll, please, on it?
Dave,
Yes.
Chelsea. Yes. Bob,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Okay, it's passed 4-0. With that, we're going to move on then to a report of other officers. We have the incident commander, Mr. Hegerman, wants to provide an update on the EOC. Mr. Hegerman, if you would, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and Assembly, I'm very happy to give this report tonight. The standing down process for the EOC is going well. I'll go over a few of the highlights of the things that we've been doing. Firstly, various members of the team have been relieved of duty. They're very happy about that and no longer having to monitor the goings on of the EOC. It's been nice to see those people go back to their normal jobs. The mandates that were repealed by the Assembly, that has gone well. I have not seen any pushback or detriment to the community from those actions. So thank you to the Assembly for accepting those recommendations and seeing them through. The harbor access mandate is still in place. It will expire at the end of the month along with the emergency declaration. That harbor access mandate is going well. The ships are contacting our health officer, Dr. Cicillo, this month. And as far as I know, there have been no denials of moorage or disembarking due to a health event on board. We have transitioned the distribution of any free masks to the public health office. From the library had been the point of distribution for those free masks during the pandemic, and now that has transitioned to Aaron Michael's office at the Public Health Center. The community risk plan has been updated for the last time, hopefully, and is available as a link to the dashboard. The dashboard is still active, and the hospital will be updating that web service for the foreseeable future. They will determine when that service is no longer needed. Vaccination clinics are ongoing. Their PMC is continuing to do an outstanding job of offering vaccinations to Petersburg residents, visitors. Anybody that wants a vaccine in Petersburg can get one. They just need to talk to the hospital. The vaccination incentive program is going well. We've had 3 weeks of winning drawings, and we've got one more to go this Friday, and then a grand prize drawing next Monday, $4,000. So anybody that would like to get a vaccine and sign up for that drawing is more than welcome to do so. There is a potential of additional funding coming from the Alaska Chamber for additional incentives. I haven't gotten a confirmation from Alaska Chamber on that yet, but likely it would look different because we do still have to spend that money by the end of the month. So if they do send us any additional funds, we'll likely put those into gift certificates or some other kind of incentives that can be purchased ahead of the end of the month and then handed out for new vaccinations after that. Still yet to be determined if that's going to happen or not. Airport testing, screening is no longer being offered at the airport. That went away with the airport testing mandate that was repealed. There are greeters working till the end of the month, and of course the testing is still being offered in the tent at the airport. That testing will likely transition to the hospital campus, but that is yet to be determined as well. That it will be dependent on the staffing levels possible from PMC to continue that service. And the state has offered an extension to their current contract to the end of September, but it needs work. There are several questions that just showed up today, and they asked Clerk Thompson to get it in the agenda. Hope they get it in the agenda tonight, and we all know that that's impossible. So there are some questions. We'll work through those and hopefully have that up for ratification by the Assembly at the next meeting. We did establish an alternate care site at the school during the first portion of the pandemic. All of those supplies have been stored on Parks and Rec areas in case we needed to deploy them in an outbreak. And those are no longer needed, so they are being moved away from that site. They'll still be stored for a short while, just in case, along with other items that the EOC purchased or the borough purchased to respond to the pandemic. And those stored items will be over at Public Works in a container van and ready to deploy if we need them. The COVID Hub website is still up, will remain up for a foreseeable future, next couple months anyway. Likely will not be updated. It'll be transitioned just to be a site where people can go to link to other sites to get information from the state of Alaska or CDC. Any press releases that have been pushed out by the EOC will be transitioned to the hospital. And as of the end of the month, the EOC will no longer be in place, so we will not be issuing any press releases on positive cases or the weekly situation updates that we have been. Like I said, I think it's going very well. I think we're ramping down and getting the word out to the community of the changes, and everything's going well. So I entertain any questions.
Any question from assembly members, from Mr. Hagerman? Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, Member Trent. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Carl. With that, we have another presentation here tonight. Alaska Redistricting Board Executive Director Peter Torgelson's redistricting basic presentation is going to be presented to the Assembly. Mr. Torgelson, go ahead, if you will.
Thank you. I think we have a presentation that will be on screen shortly. My name is Peter Torkelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Redistricting Board. And I'll leave a few cards on this back table in case anyone wants my contact information afterwards. So next slide, please. You may recall that in 1998, Alaska voters passed ballot measure 3. This fundamentally rewrote how new legislative districts are drawn in the state of Alaska. Instead of the governor essentially doing it himself, the goal was to provide some separation from the existing political structure and create a 5-member independent board, 2 members appointed by the governor, 1 by the Senate President, 1 by the House Speaker, 1 by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. There were some requirements in the constitutional amendment for board members. They must be Alaska residents. They must be from a geographically diverse areas of the state. And most importantly, they may not run for legislative office in the term following the adoption of a new plan. That actually used to happen quite a bit. Next slide, please. The current board was appointed in August 2020 and has convened. John Binkley of Fairbanks was selected chair. Melanie Banky of Nome, Nicole Boromeo of Anchorage, Bethany Markham of Wasilla, and Bud Simpson of Juneau, who I believe is joining us as a Zoom participant this evening. He wished he could be here but wasn't able to make it. Next slide, please. So why should we change the districts we have? It won't be fun. Change is always uncomfortable at different times. So why should we redistrict? Next slide, please. The answer is that the US and Alaska's constitution's equal protection clauses require that we maintain 1 person, 1 vote to the degree that's practicable. What that means is if you're in an area where people are leaving, outmigration is being experienced, your vote's becoming more powerful. If you're in an area where people are moving in, your vote's becoming diluted as more people move into your area. So every 10 years after the US Census is conducted, new lines must be drawn. Next slide, please. Now, we all know Alaska has a lot of churn. I was surprised to learn that long-term historically, Alaska's experienced 6% in migration and about 6% out migration every year. That's 40,000 people. It means in 3 years, we have an 18% turnover. That used to be the way it is. That has changed, as you'll see in recent slides. Of course, this churn is not equally spread around the states. Some areas are relatively stable. Some areas have a lot of turnover, like out at the Aleutians West, where the big fish processing plants are. A lot of turnover there. Next slide, please. Here's Alaska's population from just after the war until 2019. You'll notice pretty much a long trend of growth followed by a recent plateau. Next slide, please. When we subtract in-migration from out-migration, we get to see the changes, and right away we see the Korean War, the pipeline boom, the bust, oil boom, bust, and so forth. You see the US recession brought people to Alaska because our economy was doing well, jobs were scarcer down south. What we've seen though is starting in about 2012, a persistent pattern of out-migration, which is difficult to fully explain. The economy down south is doing well, that's certainly part of it, but we don't really know the full story there. Next slide, please. Now, we did still have some growth this last 10 years, most of which is natural increase, which means new births. But you'll notice that going back over previous decades, when we've had up to maybe 130,000 new people to draw into legislative districts, we're seeing a fundamental shift this decade with just over one House seat's worth of new people, just 23,000 people to accommodate. That's going to mean this cycle is different than every cycle that's been before. How that will play out, of course, is impossible to predict. Next slide, please. Of course, when will we get to start drawing new lines? Normally, I'd be right here today with lots of maps. We'd be talking about lines, but because of COVID, the census has been delayed. Next slide, please. When we get the data is very difficult to figure out. I've posted the emails I've received from the Census Bureau on the website. You can go read them yourself. And if you can figure out what they mean, give me a call. There's lawsuits involved and censuses, language waffles. Yes, here, no. Anyway, there seems to be consensus building that in mid-August, we will start to see data. Next slide, please. The Alaska Constitution, thankfully, was crafted without a fixed date. California's has a fixed date. They have to have a plan by set date. That's, of course, not happening. Ours is crafted based on the official reporting of the US Census data. And after that, we have 30 days to adopt one or more proposed plans, and then 90 days to adopt one final plan. Next slide, please. So in a normal timeline, we would have got the data mid-March. We would have adopted a final plan just a little while ago, and then the Constitution provides there's a 30-day window for litigation. If anyone wants to sue the board over the plan, they have 30 days to do it, so that we would be in that litigation 30-day window right now. Next slide, please. If we get the data in mid to late August, this is just a hypothetical, we would adopt a final plan just before Thanksgiving, and the litigation deadline would be December 22nd. Next slide, please. If we got the data on September 30th, which is when census at one point said was going to happen, our deadline would be December 29th, smack between Christmas and New Year's. It's a lovely time to be working on new districts. Next slide, please. Importantly, though, regardless of exactly when we get the data, the litigation window is going to be very compressed. And that's not something that we can change. Next slide, please. Here's a draft timeline. Go ahead and go to the next slide, which zooms in. When we get the new data, we have just 30 days to come up with one or more proposed plans. It's going to take us probably a week just to analyze the data and figure out what the changes are. Then there's going to be some public hearings as we hear from folks. Last cycle, the board adopted 5 proposed plans. 2 were drawn by the board as options. 3 were presented by third-party groups who brought a plan and said, we think you should consider this plan. The board adopted all 5 as proposed plans and took them all over the state. Next slide, please. In what we call the roadshow phase, 60 days to take these proposed plans out to communities and to get feedback. Now, we don't know exactly where we're going to go. Petersburg does appear here, assigned to group 3. We don't know exactly how that's going to look yet. Last time the board broke into 3 groups just to be able to cover more ground. We may do that, that's up to the board. But we will be back in Southeast sometime in probably late fall with a number of maps for you folks to give us feedback on. And we look for your input at that time. Next slide, please. As a small historical note, the board adopted the final plan on day 87 last time, and I expect this time as well will be right down to the wire. The census did provide data on April 26th. We now know our official statewide population is 733,391. That means our district target is 18,335. There's a typo in this presentation, which I sent several weeks ago. The goal is 18,335 is the new legislative district target. Now, the delays and the compressed litigation window mean it's possible that if someone wants to run for legislative office, they won't necessarily know who they're running against or even exactly where their lines might fall. The board is keenly aware of this challenge. There's really nothing we can do to change the timeline. We can't make the census give us the data sooner, And so we're stuck in that regard. We're aware of that. We'll do the best job we can. That's all we can really say. Next slide, please. Interestingly, Coben's mentioned there, I've never met the board, and the board, we're going to have hopefully our first actual meeting sometime soon. We do have a website, akvdistrict.org. Next slide, please. There's several ways, buttons where you can click to get involved. Next slide, please. If you give me your name and email address, I will be happy to add you to the email list, and I email this list anytime there's something the census, census gets poked and they send out a press release. We let folks know if something gets changed or some new news is coming out. So if you want to stay informed, that's the best way to do it. Next slide, please. We of course have maps. Right now, there's only one plan, the current 2013 plan. All those plans are there for high-res PDF viewing, downloading, and so forth. And once proposed plans are adopted, you'll find them all here. At some point, there will be hundreds of maps here. Next slide, please. I think it's the last one. So thank you very much for having me, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you might have about redistricting.
Are any questions from the assembly?
Just
Okay, Member Tremblay?
Thank you. This was a fascinating presentation. So my question's kind of more to our clerk, that is this available somehow for the public to see or learn more about possible, or should they contact you?
It's part of the packet, so it's published
Okay.
on the website.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because just if anyone's listening to that, the slide's well worth looking at, and it's very fascinating and will definitely have an impact on us. So looking forward to the fall presentation, and my condolences for the data delays.
Yeah.
Other questions? I have one for you. Back to the point you made about the 18335. Is that the minimum to establish a district or to make a change in a district? Is that, I wasn't quite clear on that.
Thank you. 18,335 people is the ideal number. Now, federal law allows us to go plus 5% or minus 5% underneath that. However, the state constitutional standard from the courts is plus 1%, minus 1%. So we're shooting, ideally, all the districts would have exactly the same number of people. That never is possible because we build them out of census blocks, and a block might have 60 people in it or 40. And so there's going to be some variation. We'll be shooting for up to 1% more or down to 1% less. That's not a whole bunch. That's 180 people plus or minus. So 18,335 is the ideal size. So if, for example, just hypothetically, if a borough had 3 times 18,335, then they would have 3 seats worth of folks in there. Now, how the lines will break out, the whole state is a system, and it all must work together like a puzzle. So ideally, that'd be perfect. But the way lines fall, usually there will be some boundaries that will not be able to be respected in the final map.
So using that, then you could add legislators through that process. Am I reading that right?
There are 40 legislative seats, and we can't change that number.
Going
So we have to take that, we divide it by 40, and then find 40 puzzle pieces that all lock together with that population.
Thank you. Member, go ahead, Dave.
In your effort to do this, you try and keep boroughs together.
So the Constitution provides us with 4 essentially standards to use when drawing a district: compact, contiguous, equal population, and to the degree practical, socioeconomic integration. Then they provide the option for respecting local government boundaries and natural watersheds if you can. So the board is certainly aware of borough boundaries. That has been an issue in past litigation cycles. It's something we're keenly aware of. But the way the maps fall, you'd have to have exactly the right number of people. Borough boundaries are virtually always broken in a legislative district, but the board's aware of it and will take it into consideration to the degree possible. But the first is compact, contiguous, and the equal population. Those are the mandates that we have to follow. And of course, compact is, how do you make the Aleutian Island District compact? Alaska's geography is very challenging in that regard, but it is a factor that we're required to consider under the Constitution.
Member Tremblay?
I realized I had a question after yours, Member Lynn. That number 18,335, do you know offhand how different that number is from past cycles?
Yes, thank you. Great question. The previous was 17,756 from memory. So we're up about 500, 600 people.
Other questions from the assembly? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll put some cards back.
That, we come up on the mayor's report here, and under the mayor's report tonight, we have Sandy Beach Park Appreciation. Thank you to everyone, and particularly Desi Burrell for all the work on the new Sandy Beach Park Playground. It will be enjoyed by residents and visitors for years to come. So last, seeking letters of interest, the Assembly is seeking letters of interest from Borough residents who wish to serve the community by filling a vacant seat on the following boards commissions until October 2021 municipal election. Planning Commission, 1 vacant seat. Public Safety Advisory Board, 2 vacant seats. Letters of interest should be submitted to Kirk Thompson at the Borough office located at 12 South Nordic Drive by mailing to P.O. Box 329 Petersburg, AK 99833, or by emailing to dthompson@petersburgak.gov. Thank you. Tonight, there is no manager report, so we'll move on to unfinished business. The first item under unfinished business, ordinance 2021-11, an ordinance amending chapter 4.30 Alaska Remote Sellers Tax Code of the Borough Code, second reading. Do I have a motion to?
So move. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, with that, clerk, would you please call the roll?
Jeff,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Bob.
Yes. With that, it passes on the second reading unanimously. We'll move on then to new business. Under new business, we have resolution 2021-08, a resolution of the Assembly of the Petersburg Borough approving direct disposal of borough land by granting a 20-foot wide utility easement in perpetuity to AT&T Wireless at 419 Sandy Beach Road. Do I have a motion to?
So move. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I guess we have AT&T also is on the line to answer any questions we might have on this. Okay,
Yes, I'd like to
Okay.
state that during the council or the assembly discussion on the radio today, I misstated that GCI was doing this project and I had a mental slip. It was actually AT&T, so I apologize for that. No, it's a good idea. The more fiber optic capability, broadband capability we have in the region here and in other places is something we need. And this item has been already approved by planning and zoning. It's an abandoned or was used in the past by AT&T, and I see no need why we should not approve this. So I'll be supporting it.
okay, thank you. There was another question today, was we were on the radio, that I probably need some follow-up. The question is how much will this benefit Petersburg? And I think that it was a good question. I don't know if we answered that adequately or not. So if we could have the gentleman answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. This is Jason Custer with Alaska Power and Telephone. Right now, the scope of the work that we're doing for the USDA funded project is to create the submarine cable and then the terrestrial networks in Kaufman Cove and Kasan. Those are the elements of the work that are within the scope of the grant. We're hoping that we can accomplish that by the end of 2023. And after we're finished that and the cable's in place, we'll be looking at how we can use the cable to upgrade service in other locations. And so that could include Prince of Wales Island. It could include Petersburg. We don't have any concrete plans though at this time because we're focused on performing the scope of the grant. But definitely it's an asset that will be available for others in the region to use and will certainly help Petersburg in terms of having another option, another fiber optic cable there. So more resiliency, improved support for public safety, redundancy. definitely. But for right now, our focus is on performing the work that USDA is funding.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Mr. Custer? Okay, with that, would the clerk please call the roll, please?
Bob,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And that passes unanimously here. Item B then, under the straddling engagement letter, the borough's longtime bond attorney has retired. Utility Director Hagerman requests engaging the bond counsel services of Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, Roth, the DBA Stradling for prospective bond issuance, if approved by the voters, to finance the Blind Slough hydroelectric project and additional diesel standby generations for the PMPL system. This is the same firm that SEPA recently used for electric bond refinancing. Section 2.14 in the Borough Code provides that the Assembly may appoint special legal and financial advisors for bond issues or other matters. With that, I'd entertain a motion to proceed?
So move.
Second.
Okay, been moved in second. And with that, Carl, would you please give us a little more detail, so particularly for public to understand what we're looking at here and where we're going to go?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. So the issue that's in front of the Assembly tonight is engaging Stradling, as you've just read from the packet, to help us out with all of the many details and legal issues that surround bond issuance. The reason for the bond, of course, is the funding of the Blind Slough hydroelectric project and potentially adding more standby diesel generation for our system. We are in the middle of the process of a rate study, and we've gotten far enough to know that our reserves are not sufficient enough to just purchase standby diesel generation. And we do need additional standby diesel generation. We saw a winter peak this last winter of 13.3 megawatts. And that really, if we would have had an outage from SEPA at that time, would have put us in a very precarious position to restore power to the community at that time. So we do need to move towards adding diesel generation, and the cost of that and the cost of constructing the Blind Slough hydro repairs. That is a reason that we're looking at bond issuance. Again, circling back to the action in front of the Assembly tonight, the engagement of Stradling will assist the department and Power and Light and Finance in developing the required ordinances, and those need to be introduced very soon so that enough readings, if approved by the Assembly, can be completed before the cutoff for the fall ballot arrives. So we're looking forward to hopefully to have this issue in front of the voters this fall. There are some additional steps that need to take place before then, but this is one of the very first steps is retaining some bond counsel so that we can prepare documents.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerman. Any questions from the Assembly? Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess to Carl, will the Strandling group, will they help us determine if it's going to be a general obligation bond or a revenue bond?
It will be a revenue bond.
It will be, okay. Thank you.
Other questions from the Assembly? Okay. Okay.
And Carl, is it correct that, that we will obligate our rates that we pay for the electricity for this bond?
That's exactly right. So the reason that we're doing a rate study is to determine if our existing rates are adequate enough to take on additional debt to fund these projects. At this point, it's not complete, but I can tell you that it's not, and that we are looking at rate increases this year and next year to fund some debt service. And that, we need to be transparent with the community on that issue, that these projects really need to occur. But that does mean that rates will go up to pay off this debt.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Just one other question. Okay, last winter, I know there was a couple of really cold days. How much generating capacity do we currently have in the city?
A little bit over 14 megawatts, including the Blind Slough Hydro.
And without the Blind Slough Hydro?
Drops us down to below that peak.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Again, any other questions for Mr. Hagerman? Would the clerk please call the roll on the straddling engagement letter?
Bob,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Okay, and that passes unanimously. The next item we have is a special use permit for Jason and Julie Anderson at 208 North 4th Street. The special use permit will allow for placement of a greenhouse, fence, and planter boxes partially within the XL Street right-of-way, adjacent to parcels number 101, 106, 207 at 208 North 4th Street. The Planning Commission recommends approval of the special use permit with conditions. Do I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved by member Yuchi and seconded by member Kensinger. Any comments or questions from the assembly? Okay, again, would the clerk please call the roll?
Chelsea,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Dave,
Yes.
That we have on communications, we have in this packet, and as member Tremblay talked about earlier, that there'll be in the communications, this presentation tonight. In addition to that, we have Petersburg Business Climate and COVID-19 Impact Survey 2021 will be on the web. We talked a little bit about that today. And Member Kensinger, you might want to address that a little bit since you were involved earlier, I think, with it.
Yes, this is a very interesting study that's done yearly through Southeast Conference. Basically what it was is a survey of, I believe it was 40 local businesses, and they answered questions. And the main thing that it said was that I think what everybody knows is that the biggest impacts from COVID in the nation have been on small businesses. And we're primarily small businesses here in Petersburg. So the impact was pretty big. If you look at the decline in revenue that we had in town was very significant. The one bright thing about this was we were number 4 in Southeast in terms of receiving various grant funds. So the businesses within the community were very successful at obtaining grant funds. And I think that really was important in keeping our economy going this last year. So there's some real negative things in the report, but I'll be very curious to see where we sit when this new report comes out, that they'll probably, the person that generated this report indicated they'll probably be doing another one next April. So it'll be very interesting to see the comparison between last April and this April. And hopefully it's a lot more positive.
Thank you. With that, we have the correspondence will be on the web that was received since May 27th, 2021. We have then assembly discussion items, and I don't see any denied here. Assembly member comments. Does anybody have comments to make tonight? I see a number of head shaking, and with that, I'll move on to recognitions.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the nonprofit group Humanity in Progress in the community. The 5 board members are Ashley Kawashima, Alex Helms, Annette Bennett, Pat Sessa, and Courtney Hess, and they're doing work providing direct service to folks struggling with housing in the community. They've recently released results from their point in time count that they do annually in January. The 4th one was this year. And that is a day where they connect people to services as well as ask people to fill out a survey talking about their their housing status. And their 2021 survey results included 80 people who were housing insecure, as well as 27 that were living in a place not fit for habitation or also couch surfing. And that was in line with their 2020 numbers as well. That was around 100 participants who were housing insecure and around 23 people who were couch surfing at the time. And so there's a lot of things to do, but one of the things that they do is provide food for people to take and have with them during their days. And so they are doing a food drive this Sunday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. from Sunday. That's the 27th of June. People can drop off food at 208 Haugen Drive. That's where the Farragut Farm Stand is, formerly the bottled gas location. And examples of things that they would like for the community members that take advantage of the service include English muffins, bagels, fruit cups, applesauce cups, canned foods with pop lids, protein and granola bars, individual trail mix packs, fruit snacks, meat sticks, and more. Hearty food that's easy to take to go. And so I'd like to thank those board members. I'd like to thank the people who support that group and their work, and hopefully people can support them. And if anyone has questions or would like to reach out to them but don't know how to, they can go ahead and email me, and I'm happy to try to connect them. So I'd like to recognize them for the hard work they do for members of our community.
Thank you, Member Kimberly. Any other recognitions tonight? With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
It's moved and second that all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, folks.